Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Welcome back for another episode. This is Frank Agan, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections, and you are listening to the Networking RX podcast. Thanks for joining me. Last week, I had a commentary, or I discussed what I'll call the LinkedIn debate, whether lots of connections, quantity of connections is better than having fewer connections, a quality of connections. And I just kind of went through in all honesty, I really kind of shared my view of it, but tried to do my best to share the view of other people. And I've acknowledged that there's no right answer. It depends upon what you're really trying to get from LinkedIn relative to building a network. And I'm of the mind that LinkedIn is not a sales machine. It's a way of making connections and building relationships. And I think a lot of us, most people I talk to, whether they err on the side, I shouldn't say error, whether they fall to the side of just wanting quality connections or somebody who's looking to build larger connections, we all agree that it's really about relationships and not making sales on LinkedIn. In fact, I talk to people who swear at LinkedIn. Some of us swear by LinkedIn, but some people swear at LinkedIn saying, well, it didn't work. I didn't get anything out of it. And they're the ones who got on LinkedIn, built a profile, and wondered why it didn't generate sales for them. It's not supposed to. It's not what it's really geared for, in my opinion. At any rate, I kind of want to, continue that conversation, but take a little different approach. I have somebody that I've connected with on LinkedIn. I hesitate calling people friends, but he's somebody that I've developed a relationship with. His name is Josh Tapp, and Josh he runs a podcast called The Lucky Titan, and we connected. We were on one another's podcasts. He was on my podcast. It was episode 157, which I released back on March 12th. And then he had me on his as well, or maybe it was vice versa. I can't remember. Doesn't matter, but we are on one another's podcasts, and I'm going to be doing a program for him later this year. And, we kind of share information. Hey, how's this going? And it's really what LinkedIn is about. He is somebody who I connected with on LinkedIn. A conversation ensued. We got on a call. Actually, I think we did a Zoom call so we could see each other face to face. Got to know him, got to like him, got to trust him. He's a big Marvel movie fan, so that's looking for common bonds, and we found that, and we kind of joke about that when we talk to one another. But are we friends? I'm not on his holiday card list, and I don't need to be. Josh, just letting you know. But we are connected, and we have a relationship, and it's a good professional relationship. I would not hesitate referring people to him. I would not hesitate doing things for him. And I hope he feels the same. I'm sure he does feel the same. But he's somebody that I can send a message to and get a response in a fair amount of time. Leave all that as it is. But he put a post on there, and he kind of more on my side of the whole debate, quantity versus quality with respect to LinkedIn. And he'll be honest with you. He'll just say, when I first got on LinkedIn, it was about just getting anybody. Kind of build my numbers, doesn't matter. Got a pulse, you can be my connection on LinkedIn, kind of a thing. And I think we all kind of start out that way. I remember starting out that way. I was early on, it was back 2008. Was writing a book with Lewis House, people who know Lewis is, called Linked Working. And I remember just getting on LinkedIn, and Lewis had been on there for a while, and he was really kind of gung-ho about it. And I had deleted a lot of requests to get on LinkedIn. I didn't know what this thing was. And what are these people doing? I don't know what this is. He kind of the one who sat me down and said, no, you really need to look at this. And he said, our goal is let's get you to 500 connections. And quickly got me to 500 connections, and it was pretty much just anybody. Got a pulse? You're my connection. and I don't necessarily operate that way anymore. I do connect with a lot of people, and I'll kind of get into my philosophy. And the reason I'm bringing Josh Tapp's name up is because his philosophy really aligns with mine. And he shared a post when he hit 10,000 connections on LinkedIn. Again, admitting, hey, my first 2,000 were just really anybody, but this last 8,000, I've kind of had a methodology, and he wanted to share it. And I appreciated that he shared it. I commented on it. A lot of people commented on it. Some of the comments were people asking him, well, how many of these connections are meaningful? And again, he was very open about it. That some were, the early ones were just pretty much anybody. But as he had gone, he went from he took it from it took him. He says he took him 3 years and about 2 hours per day to reach 3,000 connections, and then it grew from 3,000 to 10,000 under a year. And the last 7,000 was a whole different methodology. The first 3,000 were just kind of getting on there and just clicking, connect with me, connect with me, connect with me, and hoping that it worked out. But he had a philosophy that I wanted to share, and he makes some points in here, and he's still it's still kind of the same thing. He'll tell you he uses an automated process to connect with people. And there are people out there, there are systems out there that will allow you to connect with people, to get to do a search. I think he uses a LinkedIn Sales Navigator, and using that tool and some other things, he will go through and automate and do a search and find people. But the first point he makes, which I think is the big takeaway from this, is that you can automate your connections, but you can't automate your relationships. You can automate the connections, but you can't automate the relationships. And I'd shared last week when I shared this episode that a lot of people I connect with never really communicate with me. I'll try, and then they don't respond. I'll give up on it pretty quickly, but they don't communicate with me. And I don't know if maybe they have an automated process or whatever it might be. But there are those that are willing to get on the phone with me, like Josh, have a conversation and develop a relationship, and then it kind of becomes enduring. And I've got a stable of these types of people that I've connected with on LinkedIn, and relationship has grown. And then people I've never met Josh. We never face to face. We've had Zoom calls, which feels like we're there together, but we never sat down and shared a pizza or a cup of coffee or anything like that. But we're certainly well acquainted with one another, and there's a good professional relationship there. Another one is Matt Ward out in Massachusetts, somebody that I met through LinkedIn. Certainly work with him, try and refer him when I can. He's actually an Amp Spirit franchisee now. But at any rate, you can automate the connections, but you can't automate the relationships. All the relationships that I have created through LinkedIn certainly started with connections, and then have gone to, hey, let's have a quick phone call. Let's just exchange some messages. This is getting cumbersome. Let's have a quick phone call. Cover a lot of ground. We have a phone call or a Zoom call. See one another. We talk, and that really kind of builds the know, like, and trust really fast. You kind of get a sense as to what people are about. Find ways that you can help one another, and boom, you're kind of collaborating. So that was his first point: is you can't automate relationships. You can't automate relationships, and that's a very important point that he makes. The second thing he talks about is make connections that matter. Now, with his first 3,000, he's pretty much implying, hey, listen, you're on LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn, that's good enough. That's all we need to have in common to have a connection. And what he's learned with the second, from 3,000 to 10,000, the next 7,000, is that you really need to build your LinkedIn connections with people that matter, are kind of running the same circles. You may not have the same philosophies with respect to LinkedIn, but if you're a medical professional, you probably want to be building your LinkedIn with other medical professionals. Josh helps people monetize their audience, to scale their audience and monetize their audience. And so he's looking to build connections out there with people who are either audience members or people who have audiences. I'm of interest to him. I'm of interest to him because I have an audience. I have the membership of Am Spirit Business Connections, and I also have the audience of this podcast. And so that's of interest to him because right now I'm sharing his message and it's hitting my audience. And so I'm kind of helping him, and he's done the same for me. He's taken my podcasts and he's shared them. He's shared bits and pieces of my podcasts. He's had me into some of his mastermind groups to coach and consult on professional networking. So, those are the types of people he's trying to build in. And so those are the connections that matter. It's not that he's not going to accept a request from somebody who is, a medical professional or, somebody that doesn't necessarily fit. But he's really trying to find the people that are running in his circles who kind of speak his language. And if you stop and think about it, I don't know how many people are on LinkedIn. Maybe it's 500 million people. I can't connect with 500 million people. LinkedIn doesn't allow it. LinkedIn allows you 30,000 connections. You can get followers after that, I get that, but you can really only have 30,000 followers. And even that's a big number if you stop and think about it. That's a big number. It's small in comparison to the 500 million people that are out there, but it's a big number when it comes to what you could really effectively operate with. But while you're allowed 30,000 connections, and I'm not anywhere near there, and Josh isn't anywhere near there, while you're only allowed 30,000 connections, really having relationships, having a good relationship, is a much smaller number. Is a much smaller number. We can get a whole nother podcast to talk about what that number is, and there's some science we can apply to it. But that's a much smaller number. It's probably less than 1% of that 30,000. Less than 1%. It's probably in the 100 range, and again, we can kind of get at it. But to where you can have that relationship. I can't have 10,000 people in my life that are like Josh. I would like to. I would love to have that many people in my life that are like Josh, but I can't effectively manage those relationships. I can't be available for 10,000 people to answer their questions. And so that's why he says, make connections that matter. You make connections that matter because then that builds into relationships that matter. So he may have 10,000 connections on LinkedIn, but let's say 1% of those, 100, are people he has relationships with, people like me that he's going to respond to when I pose a question or if I need a favor, or vice versa. So first thing, you can't automate relationships. Second thing, make connections that matter. And if you're interested, I would tune into Josh and what Josh has to say on LinkedIn, and certainly his podcast, which is called The Lucky Titan, because he talks about a lot of these concepts, not just with respect to LinkedIn, but just in general. The second point he makes is that LinkedIn is not about one-to-one, it's about one-to-many. And I've kind of touched on that a little bit. A lot of people get on LinkedIn and they'll connect, and I'll connect with them, and right away it's like sales mode, trying to sell to me. Boom. Frank, will you buy? Will you get into my cryptocurrency program? I keep saying that because I just had a series of inquiries about that, or solicitations. You need to be coached. You need this, you need that. Sell, sell, sell. And those people are one-to-one. They're looking at LinkedIn as one-to-one. And really what Josh is suggesting, and what I totally agree with, is it's one-to-many. It's one-to-many. What I mean by one-to-many is I'm connected to Josh. Okay, we'll work in that direction, use the example that way, but it works in reverse as well. I'm connected to Josh, and Josh is allowing me to network through him to his audience. Not directly, but indirectly, I'm sharing content that's getting out there, and his audience then is connecting me to other people, and ultimately that's going to lead to the person who wants to be a franchisee in AmSpirit or be on my podcast. And that's what he means by one-to-many, is that we need to be looking for people who can connect us to other people. Don't look to sell to the person across the table from you. Think about how that person across the table can connect you to others. And think about the person across the table you can help. So it works in reverse as well. I mean, Josh is, as much as I'm networking through him, I want him to feel comfortable networking through me, and me sharing his content and connecting with people. Hey, Josh, here's somebody who'd be a great person to have on your podcast, or here's somebody who probably wants to get into one of your networking groups. They've got an audience that they're trying to scale, and you can certainly help them. And so he's got a number of programs. I don't need to get into that. Talk to Josh if that fits for you. So don't look at LinkedIn as this one-to-one opportunity. Okay, somebody's connected with me. I've got sales breath. I'm going to sell them. Look to ways that you can help them and they can help you. And that's really kind of the building blocks of those great relationships. So again, Josh's advice, which I totally endorse. One, don't automate your relationships. Use automation to make connections, but the relationships have to be old-fashioned. Have to be talking on the phone, Zoom calls. If you can, a cup of coffee. I realize that's not always possible. Second thing, make connections that matter. Lots of people on LinkedIn. Lots of people don't really fit into your world, don't make sense for your world. Build your connections with people who make sense, because if you build your connections with people who make sense, and this applies in the real world too, if you build your connections with people who make sense, it's going to lead to relationships that make sense. And the final thing is, it's not one-to-one, it's one-to-many. It's helping one another take a message. You're working through people to the dozens and dozens of people that they know, and that's really how it's supposed to work. So anyhow, you want to hear my interview with Josh? It came out on March 12th, episode 157. Josh Tapp is the podcast host of The Lucky Titan. If you want to look that up, or just connect with him on LinkedIn. Tell him I sent you. Thanks. Before we close, let me remind you, we are looking for quality people to add to our stable of franchisees. Let me ask this question. If you are in a networking organization out there, let me run this by you. Would you rather rent an apartment, or would you rather own the apartment building? Most people will say, you know what, I would rather own the apartment building than being the poor sucker that's paying rent. That's what an Am Spirit Business Connections franchise does. It allows you to create networking groups. You can certainly just create one. I don't advocate that, but you can create multiple groups that you oversee, you coach, you help these people. They become your network, and they're paying to be part of your network. At the same time, those people can help you with your business, help you network your business. Again, all of our franchisees do something else. They're a franchisee for a couple hours in the morning, a few days a week. They're working the Am Spirit Business Connections program. The rest of the time, they're building websites. They've got merchant services businesses. They're telecommunications consultants, professional speakers, coaches, consultants. It kind of runs the gamut. Realtors, financial advisors, runs the gamut of our franchisees. And their franchise helps build those businesses. Interested? Reach out to me using the email at the end of this podcast, or the one we put in the show notes.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today, and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AMSPIRIT.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of Am Spirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.